He hired her to cook, but every morning she tried to seduce the rancher. Part 1. The bullet missed Jake's head by 3 inches and shattered the wooden post behind him. He dove behind his wagon as 2 more shots rang out across the dusty farmland he had purchased just yesterday. His heart pounded as he pressed his back against the wagon wheel, fumbling for his revolver. This was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of riding the range for other men, he had saved enough money to buy his own piece of land in southern Arizona. The previous owner, an elderly man named Henry, had sold it cheap and left town in a hurry. Jake thought he understood why when he saw the run-down barn and overgrown fields, but now he realized there was more to the story. Another shot cracked through the air, this one hitting the wagon bed above his head. Splinters rained down on his hat. Jake pulled his gun free and risked a glance around the wheel. 3 riders were charging toward him from the old barn, their faces covered with bandanas, their weapons drawn and firing. Jake aimed and squeezed the trigger. His first shot hit the lead rider's horse, sending both animal and man tumbling into the dirt. The other 2 scattered, circling around to flank him. He fired twice more, keeping them at bay, but his position was bad. The wagon offered little cover, and they would surround him within minutes. He spotted the farmhouse 60 yards away. If he could make it there, he would have walls and windows to fight from. Jake waited for a break in the shooting, then sprinted across the open ground. Bullets kicked up dust around his boots as he ran. His lungs burned and his legs pumped hard against the earth. A round tore through his shirt sleeve, grazing his arm but not stopping him. He hit the porch at full speed, crashed through the front door, and rolled to the side as more shots followed him inside. Glass shattered from the windows. Jake crawled to the far wall and caught his breath. The shooting stopped. An eerie silence fell over the farm. Jake reloaded his revolver with shaking hands, counting his remaining bullets. 12 rounds left. Not enough if this turned into a long fight. From outside, a voice called out. It was rough and mean, like gravel scraping metal. The man spoke with authority, someone used to giving orders and having them followed. You picked the wrong farm, stranger. This land belongs to the Carson gang, and we don't take kindly to trespassers. You got one chance to ride out of here alive. Leave now and forget you ever saw this place. Jake's jaw tightened. He had paid good money for this property. Every cent he had saved over 10 hard years of work. He was not running. I got a deed says different, Jake shouted back. This is my land, legal and proper. You're the trespassers. Laughter came from multiple directions. They had spread out around the house. Jake counted at least 4 distinct voices, maybe 5. Bad odds for a man alone. Your deed don't mean nothing out here, the leader said. We've been using this farm for 6 months. Henry knew better than to come around. Sold it to you and ran, didn't he? Smart man. Jake understood now. The Carson gang was using his farm as a hideout, probably storing stolen goods in the barn or using it as a meeting place between robberies. Henry had gotten scared and sold out sheep just to escape with his life. Well, I ain't Henry, Jake called out, and I ain't running. Then you're a dead man. Part 2. The first real assault came at sunset. Jake had spent the afternoon fortifying his position, pushing furniture against the windows and doors, finding extra ammunition in a drawer. The previous owner had left behind a rifle with 20 rounds, which improved Jake's chances considerably. He watched through a gap in the boards as shadows moved between the barn and the nearby trees. The outlaws were positioning themselves for a coordinated attack. Jake counted 5 men total, all armed with rifles and revolvers. Their horses were tied up behind the barn, out of his line of fire. The leader was a big man with a thick beard and a scar running down his left cheek. He wore a black hat and a long coat despite the heat. The others deferred to him, waiting for his signals. This was not some ragtag group of amateurs. These men had military precision, probably veterans of the war who had turned to crime when peace offered them nothing. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky orange and red, the shooting started again. This time it was sustained and heavy, coming from 3 sides of the house. Jake moved from window to window, firing back when he had clear targets, conserving ammunition when he did not. The walls of the farmhouse were thick adobe, which stopped most of the bullets, but the windows were vulnerable points. One outlaw tried to rush the back door. Jake heard his boots on the porch and fired 3 times through the wood. A scream confirmed at least 1 hit, and the footsteps retreated. Blood dripped through cracks in the door. You just killed my brother, a voice yelled from outside. You're going to pay for that. Jake said nothing. He reloaded and moved to the front window. The big leader was advancing with 2 others, using the wagon as cover. They fired systematically at the windows, trying to keep Jake pinned while they closed the distance. Jake aimed carefully and shot the closest man in the leg. The outlaw went down screaming, clutching his thigh as blood poured between his fingers. His companions dragged him back behind the wagon. Their attack momentarily stalled. Night fell quickly in the desert. The darkness gave Jake some advantage since he knew the interior of his house and they did not, but it also made it harder to see targets. The outlaws kept up sporadic fire through the night, preventing him from resting or attempting an escape. Around midnight, Jake heard movement on the roof. Someone was trying to come down the chimney. He grabbed a burning log from the fireplace and tossed it onto the hearth, then piled on dry wood until flames roared up the flue. A yelp of pain and angry cursing followed as the climber abandoned that approach, but the distraction had cost him. While he dealt with the chimney, 2 outlaws had reached the side of the house. They were working on the window boards with crowbars, trying to pry them loose. Jake fired through the wall where he estimated they stood. The crowbar sound stopped, replaced by running footsteps. "This is pointless," the leader called out. "You can't win." "We got food and water and time. What do you got?" "You're trapped in there like a rat, and eventually you'll run out of bullets or nerve or both." Jake checked his ammunition. 8 rounds for the revolver, 11 for the rifle. The leader was not wrong. Unless something changed, this would end badly. But Jake had not survived 10 years on the frontier by giving up when things got hard. He studied the layout of his property through the window gaps, forming a plan. The barn was the key. That was where they had their supplies and horses. If he could reach it, he could even the odds. The question was how. 50 yards of open ground separated the house from the barn, and the outlaws would cut him down the moment he showed himself. He needed a distraction, something big enough to draw their attention and give him a chance. His eyes fell on the kerosene lamps scattered around the house. An idea formed, dangerous but possible. Jake gathered all the lamps he could find, along with every piece of cloth in the house. He stuffed the cloth into empty whiskey bottles he found under the sink, soaking them with kerosene. Just before dawn, when he knew the outlaws would be tired from the long night, Jake set his plan in motion. He lit one of his makeshift firebombs and hurled it through the front window toward the wagon. It shattered on impact, spreading flames across the dry wood. The outlaws shouted in alarm as their cover went up in flames. Jake threw 2 more bottles in quick succession, one toward the left side of the house and one toward the right, creating walls of fire that forced the gang to fall back. Then he kicked open the back door and ran for the barn. Gunfire erupted behind him. A bullet tugged at his coat. Another hit the ground near his feet, but the flames and smoke confused the shooter's aim and Jake was fast. He crashed through the barn door and rolled behind a stack of hay bales as rounds punched through the wooden walls around him. Inside the barn, he found exactly what he expected. Stolen goods filled half the space, crates of weapons, bags of money, and supplies enough for a small army. The gang had been using this place as their main depot. No wonder they fought so hard to keep it. Jake also found dynamite, 3 sticks bundled together with a fuse. Someone had planned to use them on a bank or a train. Now they would serve a different purpose. He heard the outlaws regrouping outside, their voices angry and desperate. They knew he had reached their supplies, and that changed everything. If he destroyed the barn, they lost months of work and tens of thousands of dollars. "Come out of there," the leader demanded. "Come out now and we'll make it quick. Force us to come in after you and you'll die slow." Jake lit the dynamite fuse and walked to the barn door. He kicked it open and stood silhouetted against the dawn light, the burning fuse sparking in his hand. "Anybody moves and we all go up together?" he said calmly. "I got 3 sticks here and this whole barn is full of your stolen goods and ammunition. One spark in the wrong place and there won't be enough left of any of us to bury." The outlaws froze. Even from a distance, Jake could see the calculation in the leader's eyes, weighing odds, considering options. Part 3, the standoff lasted exactly 10 seconds before one of the younger outlaws panicked and fired. Jake threw himself sideways as the bullet passed through the space where his head had been. He tossed the lit dynamite deep into the barn and sprinted toward the water trough near the corral. The explosion shook the earth. A massive fireball erupted from the barn, sending debris hundreds of feet into the air. The blast wave knocked Jake off his feet and slammed him into the trough. Flaming boards rained down across the farm. The horses behind the barn screamed and broke free of their ties, scattering in all directions. Jake's ears rang painfully. He shook his head to clear it and grabbed his revolver from where it had fallen. Through the smoke and dust, he saw the outlaws had been thrown to the ground by the blast. 2 were not moving. The others struggled to their feet, disoriented and bleeding. The big leader was the first to recover. His hat was gone and his coat was on fire, but he still had his gun. He saw Jake and raised his weapon. Both men fired simultaneously. Jake felt a hammer blow to his left shoulder that spun him around. His own shot caught the leader in the chest, staggering him backward. Jake forced himself to move despite the pain. He could not feel his left arm, and blood was soaking through his shirt, but his right hand still worked. He fired at another outlaw who was aiming at him, missing with the first shot but hitting with the second. The man dropped his rifle and fell. Only 2 gang members remained standing. One of them, a thin man with a scarred face, threw down his weapon and raised his hands. Jake kept his gun trained on him while watching the other one, a younger man who looked barely 20. The young outlaw stared at the burning ruins of the barn, at the bodies of his companions, at the blood spreading across the ground. His face went pale and his hands trembled. He dropped his gun and ran. He sprinted across the farm and disappeared into the desert scrub without looking back. Jake let him go. The fight had gone out of him. The scarred outlaw who had surrendered spoke in a shaky voice. He was older than Jake had first thought, maybe 50, with hard lines etched around his eyes. "The boss is still breathing," the man said. "You want me to check him?" Jake nodded toward the leader. The big man had collapsed near the burning wagon, clutching his chest. Dark blood pumped between his fingers with each heartbeat. The scarred outlaw knelt beside him and examined the wound, then looked at Jake and shook his head. "Won't be long now." Jake walked over, keeping his gun ready. The leader looked up at him with fading eyes. His breath came in wet, rattling gasps. When he spoke, blood bubbled on his lips. "Should have taken the deal. Should have been left when you could." Jake said nothing. He watched the life drain from the outlaw's face until the breathing stopped, and the eyes went glassy. The Carson gang leader was dead. The scarred outlaw stood slowly. He was unarmed and beaten, no fight left in him. He had seen too many friends die today. "What happens now?" he asked. Jake gestured with his gun toward the desert. "You got one chance, same as your friend who ran. Take it or join your boss on the ground. Your choice." The man did not hesitate. He walked away from the burning farm, heading toward the distant hills. Jake watched until he disappeared, then finally allowed himself to sit down. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain in his shoulder became overwhelming. He used his bandana to make a crude bandage, packing it against the wound to slow the bleeding. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, but he needed a doctor soon, or infection would kill him just as surely as another gunfight. Jake looked at the devastation around him. His new farm was a disaster. The barn was completely destroyed, still burning hot enough that he could feel the heat from 30 yards away. The wagon was ash. The farmhouse had bullet holes in every wall, and 3 windows were shattered. 2 dead outlaws lay in his yard, with a third inside the ruined barn. But the land was his. He had defended it and won. Over the next 3 days, Jake worked despite his injury. He buried the dead outlaws in unmarked graves far from the house. He salvaged what he could from the burned barn, finding some tools and hardware that survived the blast. He patched the worst of the bullet holes in the farmhouse walls and covered the broken windows with boards. On the 4th day, a rider appeared on the horizon. Jake grabbed his rifle, ready for another fight, but the approaching man wore a sheriff's badge. He was in his 60s, with white hair and a weathered face that had seen everything. The sheriff introduced himself as William Grant from the town of Copper Ridge, 15 miles east. He had heard the explosion and seen the smoke, and when the young outlaw had stumbled into town half dead from thirst and fear, he had come to investigate. Jake told him everything. The sheriff listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes in a small book. When Jake finished, Grant looked around at the damaged farm and the fresh graves. "Carson gang has been operating in this territory for 8 months, the sheriff said. Robbed 4 banks, 2 trains, and killed at least 6 men that we know of. We've been hunting them, but they always stayed one step ahead. You did what a whole county of lawmen couldn't do. You broke them." Jake leaned against the porch railing, suddenly tired. "I just wanted to keep my farm." The sheriff pulled out a stack of wanted posters from his saddlebag. The leader's poster offered a $2,000 reward, dead or alive. 2 others had bounties of $500 each. "This money is yours," Grant said. "You earned it. Plus, there will likely be rewards for the stolen goods once we verify where they came from." The dynamite blast scattered things, but my deputy found bags of marked bills and some jewelry we can trace. Jake took the posters and stared at them. $2,000 was more money than he had ever seen at once. It was enough to rebuild the barn, buy livestock, hire help, and still have plenty left over. "What about the one who got away?" Jake asked.
"The young one who ran? He'll talk," Grant said.
"He already gave us names and locations of other gang hideouts. He's hoping for leniency, and between you and me, he'll probably get it. He's just a kid who fell in with the wrong crowd. The other one who surrendered is a different story. He's wanted in 3 states. We picked him up trying to steal a horse from the Jennings ranch." Part 4, a week later, Jake's shoulder had healed enough that he could use his left arm again. The bullet wound was clean and closing well, thanks to a visit from Dr. Patterson, whom the sheriff had sent out from Copper Ridge. The doc had praised Jake's crude bandaging and said he was lucky the round had missed the bone. With the reward money secured in a bank account, Jake began rebuilding in earnest. He hired 2 workers from town, brothers named Carl and Martin, who needed the work and did not ask too many questions about the burned barn or the bullet holes. Together they cleared the debris and started constructing a new barn, bigger and stronger than the old one. Word of the gunfight spread through the territory. People were fascinated by the story of one man holding off the notorious Carson gang. Some folks rode out from town just to see the place where it happened. Jake tolerated the visitors, but did not encourage them. He was not interested in being famous. He just wanted to work his land in peace. One afternoon, a stagecoach pulled up to the farm. A well-dressed man in his 40s stepped down, carrying a leather case. He introduced himself as Richard Bennett, a lawyer from Tucson. "Mr. Harrison, I represent the Continental Mining Company," Bennett said. "We've been surveying this region for mineral deposits, and our geologists believe your property sits atop a significant silver vein. My clients would like to make you an offer to purchase the land." Jake listened to the proposal. The mining company was offering $10,000, a fortune by any measure. Bennett laid out maps and geological reports, showing where they believed the silver was located. The vein supposedly ran right under where the old barn had stood. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Harrison," Bennett continued. "You could buy a much larger ranch elsewhere, hire men to run it, live comfortably for the rest of your life." Jake studied the maps. Everything Bennett said might be true. There could be silver worth 100 times what they were offering. But mining was dirty, dangerous work that would destroy the land. The farm would become a hole in the ground surrounded by smelters and slag heaps. "I appreciate the offer," Jake said finally, "but the land is not for sale." Bennett seemed genuinely surprised. "Perhaps you need time to consider? I can leave the papers with you and return next week." "No need," Jake replied. "My answer is no. I fought for this land and I intend to keep it." The lawyer packed up his case, his face revealing nothing. "Very well, Mr. Harrison, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Mining companies are patient, and silver does not go anywhere." After Bennett left, Carl approached Jake. They had been working on the barn frame and had overheard the conversation. "Boss, that was a lot of money," Carl said carefully. "You sure about turning it down?" Jake looked around his property. The new barn was taking shape. The fields would be ready for planting soon. Water from the creek ran clean and cold. The mountains in the distance stood purple and magnificent against the evening sky. "This is home, Carl. A man does not sell his home just because someone offers him money." Martin laughed and clapped Jake on the good shoulder. "Then I guess we better build you one hell of a barn." Over the next month, the farm transformed. The new barn was finished, with strong beams and a solid roof. Jake bought cattle from a ranch in New Mexico, good stock that would breed well. He acquired chickens, pigs, and 3 horses, including a fine mare named Dancer, who had a gentle disposition and strong legs. The farmhouse got repairs, too. New windows, a fresh coat of paint, and furniture that did not have bullet holes. Jake even planted a small garden near the porch, something he had always wanted, but never had the time or place for. Jake rose before dawn, worked the land, tended the animals, and fell into bed exhausted each night. It was hard labor, but it was his labor on his land. He had never been happier. Then 2 months after the gunfight, trouble returned. It started with small things. A fence cut during the night, cattle driven off into the hills, tools stolen from the barn. At first Jake thought it might be drifters or coyotes, but the pattern was too deliberate. Someone was harassing him. Carl found the first real evidence. He discovered boot prints near the cut fence, multiple sets, and they led toward the old mining camp in the northern hills. The camp had been abandoned for years, but apparently someone was using it now. Jake rode out to investigate. He brought his rifle and plenty of ammunition, taking no chances. The mining camp was a collection of rotting buildings and collapsed mine shafts, the remnants of a silver rush that had died out 20 years earlier. It looked deserted, but Jake noticed fresh horse tracks and the smell of recent campfire smoke. He was about to investigate further when a shot cracked from the rocks above him. Jake threw himself from his horse and took cover behind a boulder. 2 more shots hit near his position. "You made a mistake coming here, Harrison," a voice called down. "Should have taken the mining company's offer when you had the chance." Jake recognized the voice. It belonged to Richard Bennett, the lawyer who had tried to buy his land. But Bennett was not working alone. At least 3 other men were positioned in the rocks, all armed and ready. "The Continental Mining Company does not take no for an answer," Bennett continued. "We've invested too much in surveying this region to let one stubborn rancher stand in our way. You can sell willingly, or we'll take the land after you're dead. Either way, we get what we want. Jake's mind raced. This was not a gang of outlaws he was facing now, but a corporation with deep pockets and no scruples. They had probably hired professional gunmen to drive him off his land or kill him. The harassment had been meant to soften him up, make him scared and isolated. But Jake had faced worse odds before. He studied the terrain, looking for advantages. The rocks where the shooters hid offered them cover, but also limited their movement. If he could work his way around to the side, he might be able to flank them. He waited for a lull in the shooting, then moved quickly from boulder to boulder, working his way uphill. Bullets chipped rock near his head, but none found their mark. Jake returned fire periodically, keeping the shooters focused on his last position rather than his current one. 20 minutes of careful maneuvering brought him to a ridge overlooking the ambush site. From here he could see all 3 gunmen and Bennett, who was staying well back from the fighting. Jake aimed at the nearest shooter and fired. The man grabbed his arm and dropped his rifle. The other 2 gunmen spun toward Jake's position, but they were exposed now. Jake fired twice more, hitting one in the leg. The remaining shooter decided he was not being paid enough for this and retreated down the hill at a run. Bennett tried to follow, but Jake put a shot into the ground at his feet. The lawyer stopped and raised his hands. Part 5. Jake marched Bennett and the wounded gunman back to Copper Ridge at gunpoint. Sheriff Grant was initially skeptical of the story. A mining company hiring killers seemed far-fetched, but the evidence was overwhelming. The gunmen confessed quickly, naming Bennett and the Continental Mining Company as their employers. They had been promised $1,000 each to drive Jake off his land by any means necessary. Grant arrested Bennett and sent telegrams to Tucson and the territorial capital. Within days, a federal marshal arrived to take over the investigation. The Continental Mining Company had apparently used similar tactics in other territories, hiring thugs to intimidate or kill landowners who would not sell. This was exactly the kind of corporate corruption that the territorial government had been trying to combat. Bennett tried to claim he was just following orders from his bosses in Tucson, but nobody was interested in his excuses. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and would stand trial in the territorial court. The marshal, a serious man named Frank Cooper, met with Jake at the farm. He examined the property and reviewed all the documents related to the land purchase and the mining company's activities. "Mr. Harrison, you stumbled into something bigger than a simple land dispute," Cooper said. "The Continental Mining Company is owned by investors back east who have no idea what their representatives are doing out here. When they find out their lawyer hired killers, there will be hell to pay. You've done the territory a service by exposing this." Jake just wanted to be left alone to work his farm, but he understood he had become part of a larger legal battle. Cooper assured him that federal protection would be provided if necessary, and that no other representatives from the mining company would be allowed to harass him. True to his word, Cooper stationed 2 deputies near the farm for the next month. No further incidents occurred. Bennett was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The Continental Mining Company issued a public apology and withdrew all claims to Jake's land. Their eastern investors, mortified by the scandal, fired the entire western management team and implemented new policies to prevent such abuses in the future. With the threat finally eliminated, Jake could focus on building his future. The farm prospered over the following year. His cattle herd grew, his crops yielded well, and he even hired additional help as the workload increased. Carl and Martin became permanent employees, valued friends who knew the land almost as well as Jake did. The town of Copper Ridge embraced Jake as one of their own. He was invited to social events and asked for advice by other ranchers. Sheriff Grant became a regular visitor, often stopping by to share a meal and swap stories. Dr. Patterson checked on Jake's shoulder periodically and pronounced it fully healed with barely a scar. One spring morning, Jake stood on his porch watching the sun rise over his land. The new barn stood solid and proud. Cattle grazed in the meadow. Chickens scratched in the yard. The garden was blooming with vegetables and flowers. Everything he had fought for was here, real and tangible. A wagon approached from the direction of town. As it got closer, Jake recognized the driver as Mary Sullivan, the widow who ran the general store in Copper Ridge. She was in her 30s, smart and capable, with auburn hair and green eyes. Jake had spoken with her several times when buying supplies and found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he cared to admit. Mary pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Morning, Jake," she said with a smile. "I baked extra bread this morning and thought you and your men might appreciate some fresh loaves." Jake accepted the basket gratefully. The smell of warm bread was wonderful.
Much obliged, Mary.
"Would you like to come in for coffee?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They sat on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about the town, the weather, the challenges of running a business versus running a farm. Mary was easy to talk to, and Jake found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around people. She did not treat him like the famous gunfighter who had defeated the Carson gang. She treated him like a neighbor and a friend. Before she left, Mary invited Jake to a church social the following Sunday. Most of the town would be there with food and music and dancing. Jake accepted, surprising himself. He had never been much for social gatherings, but the idea of spending more time with Mary appealed to him greatly. The social was exactly as advertised. Half of Copper Ridge turned out, bringing dishes to share and instruments to play. Jake felt awkward at first, unused to being around so many people in a non-threatening situation, but Mary stayed close and introduced him around. People were friendly and welcoming, treating him as part of the community rather than an outsider. When the music started, Mary asked him to dance. Jake protested that he did not know how, but she laughed and said she would teach him. They moved across the makeshift dance floor, Jake stumbling occasionally but improving with each song. Other couples spun around them, children ran between the adults playing tag, and the evening air was filled with laughter and music. For the first time in his adult life, Jake felt like he belonged somewhere. He had a home, friends, and possibly something more developing with Mary. The violence and danger of his past few months seemed distant now, like a bad dream that had finally ended. Over the next year, Jake and Mary grew closer. He courted her properly, with flowers and dinners and long walks along the creek. She shared stories of her late husband, who had died in a mining accident 5 years earlier, and of her struggle to keep the store running alone. Jake admired her strength and independence, qualities he valued highly. When he finally asked her to marry him, kneeling in the garden he had planted, she said yes immediately. They were married in the Copper Ridge Church on a perfect autumn day, with Sheriff Grant serving as best man and half the town in attendance. Mary moved to the farm, bringing her business sense and warm presence. She helped Jake expand his operations, suggesting new crops and finding better markets for his cattle. Together they turned the farm into one of the most successful operations in the territory. 3 years after Jake first arrived at the property, twins were born, a boy and a girl. They named them Sarah and Daniel. The children grew up knowing the farm as home, learning to ride horses before they could read, helping with chores as soon as they were able. Jake taught them about the land, about hard work and integrity, about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Sometimes sitting on his porch in the evening with Mary beside him and his children playing in the yard, Jake thought about that first day when bullets had shattered his wagon and started this whole journey. He had come to Arizona looking for a fresh start, a piece of land to call his own. He had found so much more. He had found home, family, purpose, and peace. The scars on his shoulder reminded him of the price he had paid, but looking at everything he had built, he knew it was worth it. The farm continued to prosper. Carl and Martin both married local women and built houses on the property, creating a small community. More children were born, friendships deepened, and the land yielded abundantly year after year. Jake never forgot the lessons learned during those violent early days. He kept his guns cleaned and ready, just in case, but he never had to use them again. The reputation he had earned by defeating the Carson gang and exposing the mining company's corruption served as a shield. People knew better than to threaten Jake Harrison or his family. But more than his reputation, it was the community he had built that protected him. Copper Ridge had grown from a small town to a thriving settlement, and Jake was a respected leader within it. When problems arose, people came to him for advice. When disputes needed settling, they trusted his judgment. On his 50th birthday, the town threw Jake a celebration. The mayor gave a speech praising his contributions to the territory. Friends and neighbors shared stories about how he had helped them over the years. His children, now grown with families of their own, presented him with a hand-carved sign for the farm gate that read Harrison Ranch, established 1875. Standing before the crowd, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had started with nothing but determination and a small piece of land. Through hard work, courage, and the help of good people, he had built something lasting. That night, lying in bed beside Mary, Jake reflected on his journey. From that first terrifying gunfight to this moment of peace and celebration, every challenge had shaped him. Every decision had led him here. Tomorrow he would wake before dawn and work the land, same as he had done for 25 years. His body was older now, his hair gray and his movements slower, but the satisfaction of honest labor remained unchanged. This was his land, his legacy, and nothing would ever take it from him again. The farm would endure long after he was gone, passed down through generations of his family. Sarah's eldest son had already shown an interest in ranching, asking endless questions about cattle and crops. Daniel's daughter loved the horses and spent every free moment in the stables. Jake smiled in the darkness. The future was secure. He had fought for this land, bled for it, and built upon it. Now it would sustain his children and grandchildren for years to come. Outside, the Arizona night was peaceful. Stars filled the sky, coyotes sang in the distance, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. Jake closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, content in the knowledge that he had done what he set out to do all those years ago. He had built a home.